The pain struck without warning, like a knife tearing through the hollow of my abdomen. I remember clutching the banister of my townhouse staircase in Savannah, certain I could make it down, certain I could breathe through it. But the world tilted sideways. The carpet met my cheek, and then there was only the sound of someone shouting as my vision blurred into darkness. When I woke again, I was beneath unforgiving hospital lights at Memorial Health. A doctor's face leaned over mine, the words massive hemorrhage and critical blood loss cutting through the haze. I heard another voice mention BAO negative, my blood type rare, stubbornly scarce. The doctor told me quietly that unless a match was found, my chances were thin. In that moment, something colder than the bleeding coursed through me. I already knew where they would turn. They would call Camilla, my only child, my estranged child. Even through the fog, I reached for the brooch pinned to my hospital gown, a plain brass oval that had belonged to my mother. The truth was, it was more than jewelry. Months earlier, after noticing strange withdrawals from a dormant account, I had hidden a tiny recording device inside it. Some instinct told me to keep it close even here. With trembling fingers, I pressed once on the clasp. A small green light blinked against the inside edge. They wheeled me into a curtained room, monitors beeping like anxious metronomes. Every breath was a fight. I prayed for strength not to live but to stay conscious long enough to hear her voice again, even if it cut me open, worse than the bleeding inside me. When Camilla arrived, the relief in the room was almost palpable. The attending physician, a gray-haired man with weary kindness in his eyes, stepped forward quickly. "Ms. Marlowe, your mother needs a transfusion. Records show you're O negative as well. 400 milliliters could stabilize her." I turned my head just slightly, straining against the weight pressing on my chest to see my daughter. She stood tall in her navy pantsuit hair, sleek and perfect despite the early hour. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw the little girl I once held, the one who clutched at my skirts and whispered she would never leave me. But that memory shattered the instant she opened her mouth. Her eyes locked with mine, not with concern, but with a glint I had long recognized the cold fire of contempt. Silence stretched until it snapped. Then she exhaled sharp and deliberate and said, "I'd rather die than save a failure like you." Gasps filled the room. The nurse's hand froze mid-motion. The doctor stumbled over a protest, but his words were drowned beneath the roaring in my ears. I didn't cry out. I didn't plead. I had lived long enough to expect this very moment. For months, I had suspected the daughter I raised with sleepless years and sacrificed dreams had turned my worth into her burden. Now, she said it aloud for the world, or at least this room to hear. I felt one hot tear roll down into my hairline, silent and unbidden. The brooch pressed against my ribs blinked red, capturing every syllable. Camilla's lips curved almost a smile, and she stepped back. "Find someone else. I'm not wasting myself here." She turned away, the click of her heels sharper than any scalpel. The staff scrambled. Calls went out. Somewhere another donor was found, someone who didn't share my blood, but still valued a stranger's life. Minutes later, cool salvation ran into my veins, dragging me back from the cliff's edge. I closed my eyes not in relief, but in a grief so complete it hollowed me out. My body would mend, the monitors would quiet. But something deeper had ruptured, something no transfusion could repair. When the beeping steadied and the room dimmed to a merciful silence, I whispered into the sterile air. "So it's true then." My voice cracked, but the recorder caught it all. I let my eyes close again, not to rest, but to gather the strength for what I knew I must do next. The fight had only begun, and the next move would be mine. The discharge papers crinkled in my handbag as I unlocked the heavy door of my Victorian townhouse. The brass knob was cool against my palm, familiar grounding. Outside, Savannah's live oaks stretched their arms across the street, heavy with Spanish moss. The air smelled of rain-soaked brick and salt drifting from the river. I leaned against the frame, steadying myself, though the bleeding inside me had been patched. What remained was the hollowness carved by my daughter's words. The rooms greeted me with their quiet elegance, the faded Persian rug, the upright piano with its chipped ivory keys, the mantel lined with photographs of a life I thought I had built with care. One frame in particular pulled my gaze: Camilla at 18. Her graduation gown too large for her thin shoulders, eyes already hardened. I had stood in the audience that day, clutching a bouquet, heart swelling with pride. Yet even then, her lips had pressed into a thin line when she spotted me waving as if I were a blemish on her perfect photograph. I sank into my armchair, the one with worn velvet arms, and closed my eyes. My mind carried me backward to the seaside property on Tybee Island, the little cottage I once dreamed would be my sanctuary. White clapboard siding, weathered shutters, a porch where I had planned to drink tea while watching the tides roll in. I had sold it 25 years ago, long before I was ready to fund Camilla's law degree at Emory. It's just a house, I told myself then. She'll be my legacy. But legacies are fragile things. Even as a teenager, Camilla's contempt was unmistakable. She wrinkled her nose at the second-hand dresses I wore to church, muttered embarrassing when I clipped coupons at the grocery store, flinched when I dropped her off at her private academy in my old Ford sedan. I told myself it was the cruelty of adolescence that she would outgrow it once she understood sacrifice. Instead, it calcified. Each year, she built another wall between us, brick by brick, until I could only see her silhouette at the top, unreachable. Now, in the hush of my living room, I asked myself the question that gnawed every corner of my heart. Had I mistaken ambition for love? Had I fed her entitlement each time I scraped my knuckles against life to hand her more than I ever had? The phone on the side table buzzed, pulling me from the tide of memory. A message glowed across the screen. "Abuela, are you okay? Mom says you're confused." It was from Luna. Sweet Luna, 16. My granddaughter, the only bridge between me and Camilla that still held. Her words were simple, but beneath them, I felt the tremor of manipulation. Camilla was already spinning her story, painting me as a confused old woman too frail to know her own mind. The strategy was clear: undermine my credibility before I even had the chance to defend myself. I typed back slowly, careful with my phrasing. "I'm resting, darling. Don't worry about me. We'll talk soon." My thumb lingered over the screen. I wanted to tell her everything: the refusal, the cruel words, the recording blinking against my chest as her mother sealed her own betrayal. But Luna was still a child, and I refused to drag her into this war before I knew which battles I could win. Still, her message left me restless. Confusion, her mother had told her, as if the woman who built an empire of rental homes from nothing could be dismissed with a single word. I pressed my palms together, leaning forward in the chair, and whispered aloud, "You think you can erase me, Camila? You forget who taught you how to fight." The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 9 each chime, ringing like a summons. I rose carefully, my body still tender, but my spirit ignited. Tomorrow I would gather what I needed. Tomorrow I would begin the ledger of truths that no courtroom could ignore. And it would start with proving to myself that the past I built was not wasted, even if my daughter had chosen to betray it. By the following afternoon, the sharp tang of antiseptic clung to everything, the sheets, the gown, even the water in its plastic cup. I had been readmitted overnight for observation, my body still fragile after the transfusion. The beeping monitors lulled me into a rhythm of waiting. I knew she would come. Camilla never missed a chance to wear a mask. The door creaked open just before visiting hours ended. She stepped inside in a fitted charcoal suit, a leather bag slung over her shoulder, her heels clicking softly against the linoleum. Her face was arranged in sympathy, but her eyes betrayed nothing. "Mother," she said smoothly, as if the word itself were foreign on her tongue. "You gave us all quite a scare." I studied her from the bed, my pulse slowing. Her concern was a performance polished and precise. I had seen her use the same expression on clients in court right before dismantling them. "I'll be fine," I murmured, voice steady, though my throat was raw. It wasn't my time yet. She set her bag on the chair, drew closer, and adjusted the blanket at my feet with the theatrical care of someone playing to an audience. "Still, we have to be realistic. The doctors say you'll need supervision. I've been researching options. Santa Teresa Care Center has excellent reviews." The name struck like ice water. I had heard of Santa Teresa, a place where families deposited their inconvenient elders behind high walls and floral wallpaper. Camilla leaned closer, her perfume sharp and citrusy. "Once you're settled there, I can manage everything, your accounts, the properties. You won't have to worry about a single thing." Her words might have sounded comforting to an outsider, but to me, they dripped with calculation. She wasn't just planning for my recovery, she was planning for my removal. I let my lips curve faintly, as if grateful. My fingers slipped to the pen lying on the tray beside my bed. It looked ordinary, cheap hospital ballpoint, but inside, it was wired to record. I clicked it, once the sound buried beneath the whir of the air conditioner. "Perhaps you're right," I said softly, watching her face. "It may be time for you to take the reins." Her eyes flickered with something dangerously close to triumph. "It's for the best. You've done more than enough. It's time you let someone else handle things." I nodded, letting silence stretch, feeding her illusion of control. Inside, though, the steel of my resolve hardened. Every word she spoke slipped neatly into my growing archive of betrayal. She sat back, smoothing her skirt, and pulled out a notepad from her bag. "I'll need a list of your accounts, of course. And the deeds. We should begin the transition before there's any confusion." That word again, confusion. She was laying the groundwork, planting the seeds of incompetence. My heart thudded against my ribs, not from fear, but from clarity. She thought she was scripting my exit. Instead, she was writing her own downfall. "I'll gather what I can," I replied, keeping my voice small. "You'll have everything soon enough." She reached out and patted my hand. Her nails lacquered a deep crimson. "Trust me, Mother. You'll see I'm only thinking of you." The chill of her touch lingered long after she withdrew. I met her gaze squarely for the first time, and though she didn't notice, I let the smallest smile play across my lips. Because while she believed she was tightening a noose around my life, I knew the trap was already tightening around hers. When the door closed behind her and the room fell silent again, I clicked the pen once more, ending the recording. Then I whispered into the still air, one piece at a time. And the next morning, I was ready to begin collecting the rest. 2 days later, I found myself seated in the cramped office of Arturo Crane, tucked above a row of antique shops on Broughton Street. The air smelled faintly of leather and old ink, and the heavy curtains muted the traffic below. Arturo had been a notary for nearly 4 decades before retirement, a man with a sharp mind and a sharper memory. He had witnessed the signatures of half the city pass under his pen. More importantly, he was a friend I trusted. I slid the small recorder across his desk. Its casing was scuffed from years of use, but the contents inside gleamed with clarity. He adjusted his glasses and pressed play. Camilla's voice filled the room, smooth, polished, deliberate. Once you're settled there, I can manage everything your accounts, the properties. You won't have to worry about a single thing. Arturo's brows knitted as he listened. He leaned back, folding his hands together, and the years of professional detachment slipped away from his expression. Evelina, this is damning. She's not even cautious. She doesn't think she needs to be, I said quietly. She believes I'm already half gone, confused, weak. She wants everyone else to believe it too. Arturo opened a drawer and withdrew a folder of papers he'd collected for me after my call. He spread them across the desk with the same precision he once used for legal seals. These are the capacity letters filed under your name. I recognized one of the signatures immediately, Roland Sutter, the surgeon she's set to marry. His penmanship is distinctive. But this, he tapped a page with his index finger. This isn't yours. This is a forgery, Evelina. Someone tried to imitate your hand poorly. I leaned forward, my eyes catching on the cruel curve of the false letters. My own name bent into something unrecognizable. According to these papers, I had been evaluated as mentally diminished, no longer capable of handling financial matters. They're laying the foundation, Arturo continued grimly. Once you're declared incompetent, your daughter can petition for guardianship. With Roland's medical credibility, no one would question it. The edges of the papers trembled slightly in my hands. For a moment, grief threatened to flood me again, but I swallowed it down. Instead, I drew a slow breath and reached into my handbag. From it, I pulled a fresh binder I had purchased the evening before, white plain, still smelling of plastic. Across the cover, I pressed black block letters I had cut from adhesive sheets, respect. Arturo watched silently as I opened it to the first page and slipped the forged letter into a clear sleeve. Then I added a transcript of the recording. Each piece fell into place like bricks in a wall, solid and undeniable. If she wants my estate, I said, my voice steady now, she'll have to fight the woman who built it. Not the frail image she's painted. The real me. Arturo nodded slowly. Then we'll build your defense before she even strikes. I'll help you gather what you need. But Evelina, you'll have to be careful. Camilla is clever and Roland has resources. I closed the binder with a firm snap. So do I, more than they realize. Outside the window, the street lamps flickered on against the twilight, casting long shadows across the stacks of paper between us. Arturo slid the recorder back to me, his expression set in resolve. Keep collecting, he said. Every word, every slip, every forgery. Truth documented will be your strongest weapon. I tucked the binder beneath my arm as I stood. Its weight felt less like a burden and more like armor. As I stepped into the cooling Savannah evening, I whispered to myself, one piece at a time. And the very next piece would come from pretending to be weaker than I was. The next time Camilla came to see me, I was ready. I let my hair fall uncombed around my face, left the buttons of my blouse mismatched, and placed my reading glasses upside down on the table beside me. When she entered my sitting room, the faintest twitch of satisfaction curved her lips. She thought she saw decline. "Mother," she said, with a voice full of sympathy rehearsed in courtrooms. "You look tired. Did you remember to take your medication today?" I blinked, as if uncertain. "I can't quite. Which one is the morning pill again?" My fingers fumbled with the amber bottles I had lined up deliberately on the table. She leaned forward with a sigh that barely disguised her pleasure. "The blue capsule. Honestly, you should let me organize these. It's getting to be too much for you." I nodded slowly, stuttering a thank you. Inside my chest burned with fury at her presumption, but I forced my shoulders to slump. Let her believe she had the upper hand. That illusion would make her careless. Later that night, after she left with notes scribbled in her legal pad, I walked through the quiet townhouse and straightened each crooked thing I had placed askew for her benefit. My spine stiffened as I whispered into the dark. "You want a puppet, but I'll give you a mirror instead." It was Luna who reminded me why the act mattered. She appeared one afternoon slipping through the back door while her mother was still at work. She was taller than the last time I saw her, all legs and nervous energy with her father's sharp chin. But my eyes. "Abuela," she said breathlessly, dropping her school bag onto the floor. "I know you're not sick like Mom says. I can tell when she's lying. She keeps telling people you forget things, but you don't. You look at me and you remember everything." I pulled her into my arms before she could finish. The scent of her shampoo, something fruity and too sweet, hit me with a wave of tenderness. She trembled slightly, but not from fear. From loyalty. "Listen to me, Nina," I whispered against her hair. "Whatever your mother tells you, don't doubt what you see with your own eyes. I'm here. I'm steady. And I promise, no matter what happens, you will always have a place with me." She leaned back, blinking fiercely to hold back tears. "I believe you." That night, after she left, I sat at my desk with a fresh draft of my will. The old one lay beside it, marked with Camila's name in too many places. I crossed them out with a black pen each stroke, releasing years of hope I had clung to in vain. Marcellus Van. My attorney came by the next morning to witness the changes. He was a man I had trusted for 20 years, steady as oak. I signed my name with a firm hand. Luna would inherit everything: the townhouse, the accounts, even the cottage I once sold, and now dreamed of reclaiming. Camila's name remained only in one clause: conditional. If she sought help, if she proved she could honor me with respect rather than contempt, she might receive something modest. Otherwise, she was cut out completely. As I closed the folder and slipped it into the respect binder, a strange calm filled me. I had spent decades building a foundation, brick by brick, not for riches, but for security, for family. If my daughter saw only wealth to plunder, then I would hand that legacy to the one person who still understood its worth. I rose from the desk and moved slowly through the hallway, practicing the slight shuffle of feet, the occasional pause mid-sentence. My velvet gloves were soft enough to fool her, but underneath them, my spine remained iron. Camilla believed she was circling an easy prey. What she didn't know was that I had already sharpened the trap, and soon she would step right into it. The diner near Forsyth Park had been around since I was younger than Camilla. Its red leather booths were cracked, and the air always smelled faintly of coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. That made it the perfect place for quiet conversations, the kind no one wanted traced back to them. I slid into a corner booth, clutching the respect binder against my side. Delphine Ward arrived a few minutes later, a tall woman with clipped auburn hair and the posture of someone who had spent her life in boardrooms. She wasn't just my bank manager. She had known my late husband, had attended our wedding, and had handled our accounts for 30 years. Loyalty mattered to her, though discretion mattered more. She ordered nothing but tea. When the waitress left, she leaned forward and whispered, "Evelina, I wouldn't have called you here if it weren't serious. 2 weeks ago, your daughter came to my office. She brought a set of medical letters claiming you'd been diagnosed with cognitive decline. Said she needed access to your accounts for your own protection." My jaw tightened, though I forced myself to keep my expression calm. And Delphine's eyes flashed. I refused, of course. The documents looked off. I sent them to legal review. They bore Roland Sutter's signature, but it was sloppy, like he didn't think anyone would question him. The name sent a cold current through me. Roland, the man Camilla intended to marry, had already entwined himself in her schemes. "She's accelerating things," I murmured. "She thinks if she can convince the banks, the rest will follow." Delphine reached into her folder and pulled out copies of the forged letters. "I shouldn't even be showing you these, but you deserve to know. Protect yourself, Evelina. She'll try again." I slipped the documents into my binder, sliding them beneath the forged capacity papers Arturo had uncovered. Each page was another stone in the wall I was building against her. We sat in silence for a moment, the clatter of plates and the low murmur of other patrons wrapping around us. Then Delphine added, "There's something else. A detective has been asking quiet questions about Roland's clinic. Complaints from patients, rumors of unnecessary procedures. I thought you might want to speak to her." Later that afternoon, I found myself seated across from Detective Sybil Hart in her modest office at the precinct. She was in her early 50s, hair-streaked silver eyes sharp enough to cut through any lie. She studied me carefully before speaking. "Mrs. Marlowe," she began, "I understand your daughter and her fiancé are attempting to assume control of your estate. What you may not know is that Dr. Sutter is already under review. Several malpractice suits have been filed in the last year, but none have gone to trial yet. There's talk he's paid off complainants to avoid exposure." I clasped my hands together in my lap. "He's helping her forge medical letters. I have them. My bank manager refused her request, but next time, she'll try elsewhere. He's not just desperate, he's reckless." Detective Hart leaned back, expression unreadable. "If you can provide me with what you have, I can open a parallel file. We'll need more than rumors to build a case, but combined with your evidence, it could point to a pattern of corruption." I slid the copies of Roland's forged letters across the desk. She scanned them quickly, then placed them into an evidence folder. "This is a start," she said. "But be careful. When people are cornered, especially professionals with reputations at stake, they strike out." As I left her office, the late sunlight stretched long shadows across the sidewalk. I held the binder tightly, its growing weight, both a burden and a shield. And with every step I knew I was closer to unearthing what else lay buried beneath Savannah's polished surface. Detective Hart wasted no time in pulling back the curtain. 2 days after our first meeting, she called me into her office again, this time with a folder already open on her desk. The room smelled faintly of stale coffee and lemon polish, the kind of place where truth was stripped bare without ceremony. She pushed the folder toward me. "These are redacted copies, but they'll give you an idea. Dr. Roland Sutter has 3 malpractice suits pending. All involve unnecessary surgeries procedures performed on patients who didn't need them. One lost a kidney. Another is now partially paralyzed. Families are ruined financially, health destroyed." My throat tightened. I had seen Roland only twice, both times in Camilla's company. He had struck me as polished, his handshake too firm, his smile too steady. I mistook those things for confidence. Now I saw the cracks beneath the polish. Detective Hart continued, her voice steady. We believe he's leveraged his position at the clinic to pad his income. When that failed, he turned to riskier methods. Settlements have drained him. If these cases go to trial, he'll be finished. And Camilla? My voice barely rose above a whisper. The detective tapped the file. We spoke to a private investigator following the paper trail. Bank drafts, cash withdrawals, transfers, all linked to Roland. He's been pressuring your daughter. He needs money to stay afloat, and he sees her inheritance as a lifeline. I closed my eyes for a moment. Pieces began to fit together in a way I had avoided acknowledging. Camilla's sudden obsession with my finances, her eagerness to declare me incapable, her cold refusal at the hospital. Desperation breeds cruelty, but it wasn't hers alone. She wasn't just greedy, she was tethered to a man who would gladly drag her down to keep himself above water. Still, the question lodged in my chest like a splinter. Was she his victim or his accomplice? Detective Hart leaned forward. I don't want to make assumptions about your daughter's motives, but the financial pressure is clear. Roland is drowning. Camilla may feel she has no choice but to secure your estate quickly. I gathered my binder closer. She has a choice, I murmured. We all do. She's making hers. That evening, I walked slowly through my townhouse, touching the walls, the furniture, the photographs. Each object was a testament to sacrifice the seaside property I had sold to fund Camilla's law degree, the years of long hours that built the accounts she now circled like prey. I wanted to believe she had been led astray, that Roland's manipulation explained everything. But deep down, I remembered her as a teenager sneering at my worn shoes, calling me embarrassing when her friends visited. Roland might have poured gasoline, but she had carried the match long before he appeared. The phone rang after sundown. It was Arturo Crane, my retired notary, his voice sharp with concern. Evelina, I've confirmed something troubling. Roland submitted a declaration to the probate court last week. It states you are no longer competent to handle your affairs. The document is clearly fraudulent, but it shows intent. He's moving quickly. I sat down hard on the edge of the sofa. The noose was tightening. It wasn't speculation anymore, it was strategy. Thank you, Arturo, I said. My voice was steady, though my hands trembled. I'll be ready. After the call, I opened the respect binder again. I slipped the court declaration into its sleeve alongside the forged medical letters and recordings of Camilla's words. The binder was no longer just evidence. It was a shield one I would wield until the truth could no longer be denied. I stood by the window, looking out at the gas lamps of the historic district, flickering in the dark. Somewhere across the city, my daughter sat beside the man who had led her into shadows. But whether she was his pawn or his partner, I could no longer afford to wait to find out. The time for gathering had ended. The time for striking back had begun. I set the table myself, though my hands ached from the effort. 2 candles, white china, the silverware that had belonged to my mother. On the surface, it was just a family dinner, but beneath it, every plate was part of a snare. When the doorbell rang, I straightened my shoulders and shuffled to answer it. Camilla and Roland stood there, dressed as if heading to court. She in a tailored suit, he with his doctor's confidence wrapped around him like a cloak. They carried a bottle of red wine and the faintest air of triumph. Mother Camilla said, warmly, too warmly, kissing my cheek, "We thought we'd spend the evening together, like old times." I ushered them in with a smile that trembled just enough. Yes, yes, of course. Sit. It's been so long since we've shared a meal." Roland complimented the townhouse, the woodwork, the antique rugs. His eyes lingered not on the beauty, but on the value. Camilla guided him to the parlor where I'd arranged the dishes. They looked comfortable, predatory, in their ease. After a few pleasantries, Roland leaned forward. Evelina, we've been worried. Managing these properties, these accounts, it's a lot for anyone, especially after your health scare. We think it's time to make things easier for you. Camilla produced a folder from her bag, sliding it across the table. Power of attorney. Simple, really. It'll let us handle the paperwork, the bills, everything. You won't have to lift a finger. You'll finally be able to rest. I let my hand hover above the folder, then pulled back as though confused. Oh, I thought I paid the electric bill last week. Or was it the mortgage, did I forget? Her smile widened, patient like a wolf coaxing a lamb. That's exactly what I mean, Mother. You don't need to stress about these things anymore. We'll handle them. I frowned, looking at Roland. And the account. How much is in it now? 800,000, was it? Camilla corrected me gently. Closer to 7 after expenses. Oh dear, I muttered, shaking my head. I can't seem to remember. Wasn't there a cottage on Tybee Island? Or did I sell that one? You sold it years ago, Roland supplied smoothly. His hand brushed against Camilla's under the table, a signal of confidence. I leaned back, feigning relief. Ah, yes. My mind plays tricks. Every misplaced number, every false recollection I delivered with deliberate care. And with every slip, their bodies eased, their voices grew bolder. They believed they were winning. That was the point. While they congratulated themselves with glasses of wine, the tiny devices hidden in the parlor recorded everything the folder slid across the table. Roland's assurances, Camilla's patronizing tones. Every word was another nail in the coffin of their scheme. At one point, Camilla touched my wrist gently. You don't have to worry anymore. We'll take care of you, just sign. I looked at her with watery eyes and let my voice break. You're so good to me. She beamed, believing the act. Roland nodded approvingly, certain I was cornered. The evening passed in a haze of forced warmth and false promises. I poured coffee at the end, my hands trembling just enough to spill a drop. Camilla reached to dab it with a napkin, a gesture of control disguised as kindness. As they left, Roland carried the folder under his arm, certain he'd secured my trust. Camilla kissed my cheek again, whispering, "This will make everything easier." I closed the door softly behind them, leaned against it, and allowed my shoulders to straighten. The binder in my study waited for new evidence, and tonight had delivered it in abundance. The wolves thought they had tasted blood. What they didn't know was that the hunt had only just begun. The night they returned, everything was ready. My parlor glowed with lamplight, polished to a shine, yet it felt more like a stage than a room. I had set the trap. Now the curtain was about to rise. Camilla and Roland entered with confidence written in every line of their bodies. She carried another folder, and he wore the smug smile of a man who believed the victory already his. Mother Camilla said, her tone syrupy. "Tonight, let's finalize what we started. Then you won't have to worry anymore." I nodded, my face a mask of frailty. Yes. Let's sit." They settled across from me, papers spread like cards on a gambling table. Roland reached for a pen. "All it needs is your signature." I let my fingers hover over the page. Then, with deliberate calm, I straightened in my chair. My voice, no longer wavering, cut through the room. "Before I sign anything, there's something you should see." Camilla blinked, confused. Roland frowned. I rose slowly, walking to the mantelpiece where an old clock ticked steadily. I touched its brass edge and smiled faintly. "Do you see this clock or that frame by the window?" And that plant in the corner. Roland's jaw tightened. Camilla shifted uneasily. They're not just decorations, I said, my tone sharpening. They're cameras. Every word you've spoken here, every plan, every signature you've pushed before me, it's all been recorded. Roland surged to his feet, but the door behind him opened before he could move. Arturo Crane stepped inside, first his notary's seal glinting in hand. Behind him came Detective Sybil Hart, her expression cold steel, and finally, Prosecutor Javier Mendez, carrying a folder thick with prepared indictments. 2 uniformed officers flanked them, their presence heavy and undeniable. Camila froze. Roland swore under his breath. I walked back to the table, placed my small remote on its surface, and pressed a button. The parlor filled with the faint whir of a speaker as the ER video flickered on the mounted screen. My brooch camera had captured everything, me on the gurney pleading, and Camilla's voice sharp and merciless. I'd rather die than save a failure like you. The room fell silent, except for the rasp of Roland's breathing. Camilla's face went ashen. Mrs. Marlowe, Prosecutor Mendez said evenly, this evidence corroborates the bank fraud attempts and the forged medical letters. Combined with testimony from witnesses, it builds a case for conspiracy, elder abuse, and financial exploitation. Roland tried to bolt toward the hall, but one of the officers stepped forward, blocking his path. The other seized his arm, twisting it behind his back. His mask cracked, then all the polish gone, leaving only desperation. Camilla shook her head slowly, eyes fixed on me. You set me up. No, I corrected gently. You set yourself up. I only gave you space to reveal who you truly are. Arturo laid the official documents on the table, each stamped and signed. Your estate is protected, Evelina, he assured me. Everything they attempted is now legally void. Detective Hart motioned toward Camilla. You'll need to come with us. The evidence is overwhelming. For a heartbeat, my daughter looked like a child again, lost, cornered, desperate for rescue. But then her face hardened, and she followed the officers without a word. Roland cursed as he was led out, his arrogance shattered. I remained standing, hands steady on the back of my chair. The stage had emptied, the performance over. The curtain had fallen, but the story was not yet finished, because justice had only just begun its work. The morning after the arrests, Savannah seemed to hum with whispers. My phone buzzed endlessly, each call or message some version of the same story. Headlines spread across local and regional outlets. Daughter plots to seize mother's estate and surgeon under fraud investigation. My name appeared in every article, though carefully, respectfully, as the woman who had exposed the betrayal. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, the newspaper folded neatly before me. There it was, in black and white, Camilla's face, tight with defiance beside Roland's mugshot. The article described the fraudulent documents, the recordings, even the ER footage. Every piece I had gathered in silence was now public property, dissected by strangers over breakfast. By midday, the neighborhood had already taken sides. On my walk to the market, I overheard the couple from the corner house murmuring about how terrible it must be for poor Evelina. Across the street, a younger woman shook her head at her companion. Imagine your own daughter. Their words hung in the air like gnats, irritating, inescapable. Yet at church that Sunday, the reaction was different. Friends approached with embraces, casseroles, and pressed hands. "We're proud of you," whispered Margaret from the choir, her eyes wet. Reverend Holloway clasped my shoulder and said, "You've shown us that truth can survive even in the darkest places." Their kindness warmed me, but it also left me raw. I didn't feel like a heroine. I felt like a mother who had lost her child long before the headlines confirmed it. Late that afternoon, as the sun dipped low, I heard the sound of hurried footsteps on the porch. When I opened the door, there stood Luna, clutching a duffel bag nearly as large as she was. Her eyes were rimmed red, her hair tangled from haste. "Abuela," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't live with her anymore." The words pierced me deeper than any headline. I reached out, guiding her inside, setting the bag down by the entryway. She collapsed into my arms, sobbing against my chest, the sound of a child who had been forced to grow up too quickly. "Between broken breaths," she explained. "After the arrest, Mom kept saying it was your fault. She screamed, she threw things, she said you ruined her life. I tried to defend you, but she told me I'd regret taking your side. I can't stay there, Abuela. Please don't make me go back." I held her tighter, rocking her the way I had when she was small enough to fit on my lap. "You're safe here," I whispered. "You'll always be safe here." She pulled back to search my face. "Are you sure she's so angry?" "I don't know what she'll do." I guided her into the living room where the lamplight softened the edges of the day. "Luna, listen to me. Your mother made choices, terrible, dangerous choices, but those are hers, not yours. You don't carry her sins." She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. "I want to stay here with you. I want to finish school in peace. I don't care about her promises or her anger. I just want to be where I'm loved." Something inside me, bruised and hollow for so long, began to fill. I saw in Luna not just a granddaughter, but the continuation of everything I had hoped to pass on: compassion, honesty, resilience. Camilla had turned away from those things, but Luna reached for them with both hands. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "Then this is your home now." As she curled up on the sofa with a blanket exhaustion pulling her into sleep, I looked toward the window where the twilight gathered. The headlines would fade, the gossip would shift to other scandals. But this moment, Luna under my roof, safe at last, was more important than any judgment of the world. And though I knew Camilla's shadow was not finished with us, I also knew that together, Luna and I could withstand it. For the battle was no longer about money or reputation. It was about protecting the only light left uncorrupted in our family. The house was quiet that night, too quiet for comfort. Luna had gone to bed early, exhaustion finally overtaking her. I sat alone in the parlor, the newspaper folded beside me when the phone rang. The number was unknown, but instinct told me who it was before I even lifted the receiver. I answered anyway. Her voice was low, sharp, stripped of all the courtroom polish she usually wore. "Drop the charges or you'll regret it." For a moment I said nothing, letting the silence weigh heavy between us. She mistook it for fear and continued. "I mean it, Mother. You think you've won because of some cameras and your little allies, but I have ways you can't even imagine. If you don't withdraw everything, I'll make sure you lose more than money. Do you hear me?" Her breath was ragged, the sound of desperation leaking through. Before I could respond, the line went dead. My hand trembled only briefly. Then I noticed the voicemail icon blinking. She had left the threat recorded. I pressed, save the tiny chime of confirmation, more comforting than any prayer. Evidence. Another brick for the wall I was building. I leaned back in my chair. The anger inside me no longer wild or hot. It had hardened into something sharper, colder, more durable. Rage had become steel. The next morning, Luna padded into the kitchen, her hair still mussed from sleep. She sat at the table, pulling her knees to her chest. Her eyes, usually bright, were rimmed with worry. "Abuela?" she said softly. There's something I haven't told you. I set down my teacup and waited. She wanted to send me away. Before everything happened. Mom said she was looking at schools abroad. She said it was for my future, but her voice cracked. I think she just wanted me gone. Away from you? She told Roland it would be easier to handle everything if I wasn't here to ask questions. My throat tightened. I reached across the table and took her hands. They were trembling. Luna, listen to me, I said firmly. You are not going anywhere you don't want to go. She can scheme, she can threaten, but she will not take you from me. Not now. Not ever. Her shoulders slumped in relief and she nodded, but the fear in her eyes lingered. When she left for school, I sat at my desk and opened the respect binder. Inside lay the forged letters, the fraudulent court declaration, the recordings, and now, thanks to her call, a fresh piece of evidence waiting to be turned into justice. I slipped a fresh page into the binder labeled threats. Underneath, I wrote the time, the date, and the words she had spoken. For years, I had bent under the weight of being mother first protector, always forgiving even when forgiveness was undeserved. That time was gone. Camilla no longer wielded her law degree like a tool of justice. She had twisted it into a blade meant to cut through blood and memory. If she wanted to turn the law into her weapon, then I would turn truth into mine. I called Detective Hart and left a detailed message about the voicemail. I trusted her to know what to do to add it to the growing case. Then I stood by the window, watching the oak trees sway in the Savannah breeze, and let the steel inside me settle. This was no longer just survival. It was war. And I was ready to fight it on my terms. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and ink, the kind of place where stories are stripped of sentiment and laid bare in the language of evidence. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Prosecutor Mendez, the respect binder resting on my lap like a shield. Camilla and Roland sat across the aisle, their expressions carefully composed, though I caught the flicker of Roland's jaw tightening when he noticed the binder. The day began with voices not my own. First came Nurse Paloma Alvarez, the woman who had stood in the ER that night when I was bleeding and begging. Her white uniform seemed to glow under the overhead lights as she raised her hand and swore her oath. She spoke calmly, her accent thick, but her words precise. I was there when Ms. Marlowe's daughter arrived. The doctors explained her mother's condition. Ms. Marlowe required blood immediately. Camilla refused. She said, and I remember the exact words, "I'd rather die than save a failure like you." Gasps rippled through the room. Camilla's attorney objected, claiming emotional exaggeration, but the judge overruled. Paloma did not flinch. Her testimony was steady as a heartbeat, and when she stepped down, she looked at me, offering the faintest nod. A stranger had seen the truth and had chosen to carry it into the open. Next came Delphine Ward, my bank manager. She was sharp in her navy suit, a stack of files in her hands. She explained the protocols the visit Camilla had made, the forged letters bearing Roland's careless signature. Then she held up the copies she had kept. These documents were presented as authentic medical records. Our legal department confirmed they were fraudulent. Without hesitation, I refused access to Ms. Marlowe's accounts. The judge requested the documents. I saw Camilla's face tighten as the clerk delivered them to the bench. The signatures glared from the page like fingerprints of deceit. Roland scribbled notes furiously to his attorney, but the damage was done. Detective Hart followed. She spoke not as a woman, but as the voice of the state, methodical and unwavering. She laid out the paper trail Roland had left behind, payments to silence complainants, bank transfers to shell companies. credit cards in arrears. Each figure was a hammer striking down the last of his facade. "He is drowning in over $1 million of debt," Hart said plainly. These attempts to access Ms. Marlowe's estate were not acts of care, but acts of desperation. Roland's composure cracked then. He muttered under his breath, too low for the judge to hear, but I caught it a curse raw and bitter. Finally, it was Luna's turn. She sat at the witness stand, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles blanched. She looked small against the weight of the room, but when her eyes found mine, I mouthed 2 words, "Be brave." The bailiff asked her to state her name. Her voice trembled at first, but she straightened her back and continued. "Luna Marlowe, 16. The prosecutor asked her what she had heard at home, what her mother had said about me. Tears welled, but her voice carried. She told me Abuela was confused, that she would send me abroad to keep me away. She said it would be easier if I wasn't here to ask questions. Her words broke something inside me, yet they also built something stronger. The courtroom hushed the air heavy with the weight of a child forced to choose truth over blood. When she stepped down, I reached for her hand as she passed. She gripped it fiercely, her palm. Damp, her strength borrowed from mine, yet undeniably her own. The judge called for a recess, the echo of the gavel reverberating like a warning. I rose slowly, the binder pressed close, knowing the next round would demand even more of us. Because the battle was not yet won, it had only begun to draw blood. The second day of testimony felt heavier than the first. The courthouse air carried the tension of too many eyes, too many secrets ready to be dragged into the light. I sat rigid at the plaintiff's table, binder steady in my lap as Camilla was called to the stand. She moved with the precision of an attorney who knew every step of the dance. Her hair was sleek, her suit immaculate, her expression practiced. Yet when she raised her hand and swore her oath, I caught the faintest tremor in her fingers. Her voice, though, was steady. "It was Roland," she said, turning toward the jury with deliberate grace. "He masterminded everything. The forged letters, the pressure to secure my mother's estate, even the idea of declaring her incompetent. It was his plan. I was afraid of what he'd do if I refused." Roland stiffened beside his attorney, his jaw clenching as though her words were a knife. The prosecutor leaned in. "Are you saying you acted under duress?" Camilla nodded, her eyes glistening, though no tears fell. "Yes. He told me his debts were too deep, that without my cooperation, we would both sink. I tried to protect my mother, but I was trapped." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Some jurors leaned forward, caught by her performance. Others frowned unconvinced. Then Roland rose to take his turn. He was less polished, his arrogance frayed by the mounting evidence, but desperation made him bold. "She lies," he snapped. "It was Camilla who coerced me. She knew her mother's estate was vast, and she promised to save me from ruin if I played along. She prepared the strategy. She pressed me to sign the false letters. I was weak, yes, but she was ruthless." The room crackled with tension. The judge's gavel struck once, silencing the noise. I watched from my seat, every word slicing deeper. To hear my daughter blame another man for her cruelty, and to hear that man throw her to the wolves in return, it was like watching 2 drowning swimmers claw each other under. Neither reached for shore. Both pulled the other down. Then Luna was called again. My heart twisted as she walked to the stand, shoulders squared, but eyes shining with fear and resolve. She swore the oath in a clear voice, then sat, glancing once at me before facing the jury. The prosecutor asked gently, Luna, what has this experience taught you? She swallowed her hands, trembling in her lap. Then, with a steadiness that startled even me, she said, "My grandmother taught me to be good. My mother taught me to win." The words dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Shock rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge shifted his gavel, poised but unused. Camilla's face blanched. Roland stared at Luna as though she had shattered whatever fragile strategy they had left. The prosecutor allowed the silence to linger before asking softly, "And which do you choose?" "Luna." She looked directly at the jury, her voice low but sure. "Good." I felt tears sting my eyes, not from sorrow, but from a fierce, aching pride. The recess bell rang, pulling everyone from the spell of her words, but the damage was already done. The battle lines were no longer just about documents and debts, they were carved into the hearts of those watching. And as we rose from our seats, I knew the fire of guilt was spreading fast. The question was no longer whether they would burn, but who would burn first. The verdicts came after hours of deliberation, though it felt like years pressed into the silence of that waiting room. When the jury filed back into the box, their faces were somber, deliberate, and I knew, before the foreman spoke, that lives were about to break. Roland was first. The charges were read, one by one: fraud, malpractice, falsification of medical records, conspiracy. "Guilty." The foreman repeated his voice, carrying the weight of each count. Roland's shoulders collapsed inward, the bravado gone, his eyes darting around the courtroom as if searching for an exit that no longer existed. The judge's words followed swiftly: 10 years in federal prison restitution to victims' loss of license. His career, his carefully cultivated prestige, evaporated in a single sentence. The sound of his gavel struck like a coffin lid, slamming shut. Then came Camila, my daughter. The prosecutor had urged prison, but the judge considered her role differently. An attorney, yes, but not the architect of Roland's malpractice. The sentence landed lighter than many expected: a suspended term of 2 years, 5 years of probation, mandatory restitution payments, compulsory therapy, and disbarment. She would not serve time behind bars, but the punishment cut deeper than walls and locks. Her name, once spoken with respect in Savannah's legal circles, was now ash in the mouths of her peers. Camilla didn't cry. She sat frozen, her chin high, her lips a thin line. When the gavel struck again, sealing her fate, she turned her head slightly, her eyes finding mine across the aisle. What I saw there was not regret. It was fury, sharp, unyielding. The courtroom emptied slowly, the whispers of onlookers rising like a tide. Roland was led out in cuffs, shouting at the judge, at the prosecutor, at fate itself. Camilla walked freely, but her freedom carried chains no one else could see. Outside, the afternoon sun blazed over the courthouse steps. Reporters swarmed microphones, thrust forward cameras flashing. Camilla pushed through them with stiff grace, her voice low but venomous as she passed me. "She ruined me." I did not flinch. My voice steady as stone met her words. "You ruined yourself." The cameras caught the exchange. I didn't care. She walked on, swallowed by the crowd, her figure stiff against the bright glare of daylight. I stayed at the top of the steps, Luna beside me, her small hand gripping mine with quiet strength. The world seemed to watch, but I saw only the fractures spreading through what had once been my family. That night, the townhouse was quiet again. Luna unpacked her books in the guest room, her laughter tentative but real when she discovered her old stuffed bear waiting on the pillow where I had placed it. I moved through the rooms, slowly touching the walls, the photographs, the heirlooms. My daughter's shadow still lingered, but it no longer had power to darken every corner. The respect binder sat open on my desk, its pages filled with the evidence of betrayal. I closed it, gently, slid it into the drawer, and turned the key. Its purpose had been fulfilled. Justice, imperfect as it always is, had spoken. Yet as I stood there in the quiet, I felt the ache of something deeper than justice. A question that would not leave me no matter how many gavels had fallen. Because even when the law delivers its verdict, the heart is left to wrestle with fractures no sentence can mend. And I knew the hardest part was yet to come. Months passed before I set foot again on Tybee Island. The sea air struck me first, briny and sharp tugging memories from years ago when I sold the cottage to pay for Camilla's law degree. Now, after the court's rulings and careful negotiations, it was mine again. Weathered shutters framed the windows, but the bones were strong. As I unlocked the door, a hush greeted me as if the walls had been waiting all this time. I spent the first week restoring it, piece by piece, fresh paint, new linens, a vase of daisies by the window. Luna helped on weekends, her laughter filling rooms once emptied of hope. With every nail driven, every rug unrolled, I felt the house reclaim me as much as I reclaimed it. Yet the cottage was not just for solace. Out of the settlement, I carved a portion to establish a trust legal aid for the elderly preyed upon by those closest to them. The papers had already been filed, a modest fund, but one that would grow. I knew too well how silence suffocates victims, how shame keeps them hidden. This trust would give them a voice, one louder than mine alone. Evenings at the cottage became my sanctuary. I would sit at the desk by the window, the Atlantic spread before me in endless gray blue. On that desk lay a small brass key, heavy and cool to the touch. Engraved on its head was a single word, respect. Arturo had it made after the trial, calling it a symbol of what I had fought for. I kept it in the top drawer, not yet sure what lock it belonged to. Sometimes I traced the letters with my thumb, wondering if the key was meant for something more than metal and wood. Perhaps it was meant for forgiveness, a door I wasn't ready to open. Luna would ask about it, her curiosity bright but cautious. I told her it was a reminder that love without respect is hollow, and that respect is earned, not inherited. She nodded, understanding more than her years should allow. The cottage, the trust, the key, they were pieces of a new beginning. Yet even as the waves whispered against the shore, I knew one chapter remained unwritten, waiting in the quiet, and it would demand an answer I could not postpone forever. Chapter 16. Rain at the door. The storm had rolled in from the Atlantic, battering the cottage with sheets of rain and wind that rattled the shutters. I sat by the fire with a book open in my lap, though my eyes hadn't moved across the page in some time. Thunder cracked overhead, and just as I turned to stir the embers, a pounding came at the door. At first I thought it was the storm itself, the wind flinging branches against the frame. But then came another knock, weak, uneven. I rose slowly, heart drumming, and pulled the door open. Camilla stood there. Her hair clung to her face, drenched her suit, soaked through as though she had walked miles in the downpour. Her eyes, once sharp, calculating, were rimmed with something I had never seen in them before exhaustion. She shivered, her voice breaking against the sound of the rain. I can't undo it, but I want to try for Luna. The words hung between us, fragile as glass. For a long moment, I said nothing. The fire's glow spilled into the doorway, illuminating her, like a figure caught between two worlds. Behind me, the cottage was warm, steady, filled with the scent of sea air and wood smoke. Outside, the storm raged, tugging at her with every gust. My hand drifted unconsciously to the desk, where the brass key lay in its drawer engraved with respect. I felt its weight without touching it, as if it pressed against my chest, demanding an answer I wasn't ready to give. Her lips trembled as she whispered again, "Please." I stepped aside, the storm surging louder, and for the first time since the trial, my daughter crossed the threshold of a home I had built without her. She dripped rain onto the wooden floor, her arms wrapped around herself, as if bracing for a sentence I had yet to speak. I closed the door softly behind her, the storm sealed outside, and turned to face the storm that had found its way in. And in that moment, I knew the brass key would not remain in the drawer forever. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the cottage washed clean, its windows glittering with beads of water. Camilla sat at the kitchen table, her hands clasped so tightly I could see the white of her knuckles. She had not spoken much through the night, only asked for a blanket and a corner to rest. Now, in the pale light of dawn, it was time for words. I placed the brass key on the table between us. She glanced at it, then at me, eyes searching for permission that did not come. "Camilla," I said, my voice steady, "this is not forgiveness handed to you like a gift. If you want to stay in Luna's life in mine, there will be terms. Therapy to face what you've done. Restitution not just to me, but to those you hurt in your greed. And boundaries. You will respect them, or you will find the door closed again." Her lips parted, but I raised a hand. "No promises to charm me, no excuses. If you want a place here, you'll earn it. Respect, first entry, second." She lowered her gaze, shoulders sagging as if the storm outside had broken something loose inside her as well. After a long silence, she nodded once. It was not surrender, not yet redemption, but it was a beginning. That evening, I set the table for 3. Luna arrived home from school, her face brightening, when she saw her mother seated quietly at the table. The air was taut, filled with words unsaid, but I passed the bread basket down the line. Luna reached for it, her small hand brushing Camilla's, then mine. For a heartbeat, all 3 of us touched the past, the present, and the fragile future suspended in that simple act. I watched them both, my heart torn between ache and hope. Love without respect is debt. Tonight, we pay in honesty. We ate slowly, the conversation cautious but real. Not a return to what once was, but the first careful stones laid on a new path. The brass key remained on the table throughout the meal, not a pardon, but a promise. Its engraved word caught the candlelight: respect. When the plates were cleared and silence returned, I looked at the key and let my fingers rest upon it. Because I knew the hardest question still lingered unanswered. When respect finally arrives, do you open the door or guard it forever? Outline.